Now we start the second one, after having identified a few privacy considerations or the possibilities or the priorities what to do. I don't think we have agreed already, but we have some hints on that. We now go into the privacy engineering process, and there's one proposal by Frank and others, and he will show us what his company, the company Nokia, has developed, and this is not the bridge. That's not from Nokia. He will he will inform us. He will inform us more. Okay, and afterwards the conversation will be done with Ultan again. Okay, and so let's see the flame sparkling between the both, and of course we will intervene then. Okay, Frank, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So this might not be actually the bridge to privacy engineering, but I'm sure all of us who have an engineering background remember from physics the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And my point here is that to answer one of the questions that might come up, do we need privacy engineer discipline to, back up please, do we need, but I offer an organization that if you try to engineer a bridge and you don't have structural engineers to help you, you might end up with the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. This bridge was built without understanding of testing for harmonic nodes within the design, and when the winds came up and reached the right harmonic pitch, the bridge collapsed. And indeed, the situation, as we've talked about in earlier sessions, is that we're dealing with a single digital marketplace built on an internet and web that is like the Tacoma Narrows. We've had security considerations built into our IETF protocols and required for now probably, Hannes, 15 years, 20 years? I know I had to put them in mine, and I remember what I did the first time on my first RFC. I copied from one RFC that was pointed out by an area director in the IETF. This is a very good privacy considerations, so I just copied it into my RFC and found out, no, that's not the way you do it. And now we are starting to see privacy considerations being talked about also. My point is that if we take an ad hoc approach rather than a systematic approach, we could still end up with harmonic nodes built into our design. Next slide, please. So how do we go about mapping privacy activities into the product development lifecycle? That's what we're talking about. Privacy by design means baking privacy in. So there is, to start off, privacy engineering is not an independent process. It's not something that's thought about separate from the product creation process. It's an integration of various activities. I don't have the time to go into these, but these are activities and processes that we use at each stage into the product development life cycle. But it needs to be complemented by a piece that isn't transparent here, and that is by privacy assurance. So just as we've learned in security, you can build security into our products, but we need to also have, in addition to the security requirements, we need to have assurance requirements. Commonly, a lot of the discussion talks around common criteria for security, but those are essentially the implementation criteria that we then use to develop test cases against supposedly the security controls we put in place. Are they there? Are they working adequately? You have a privacy champ on your development team. If you haven't got basic privacy education and even more education for the privacy champs so they understand how to translate privacy requirements into product requirements, and even some advanced training that you might have for things like third parties that are working with you. And also, eventually we want to get to privacy coding training and privacy testing also. Next slide, please. So the goal is actually to have a complement. You might look at the yellow chevron as implementing privacy into the products and then verifying on the assurance side. That's why we call it privacy engineering and assurance. And also the verification piece is part of the so-called trust and verify. I trust that since you have this set of privacy requirements in your backlog for your product, you're going to implement them, and they're going to, the design patterns that you use to implement are going to be effective. but you need to verify that also. Another aim, which is evident here, sorry to use the pun of evident, but another aim here is that you want to leave sufficient level of evidence or artifacts from the privacy engineering and assurance activities to support what will ultimately, we all know that things do happen, so when you ultimately have to use your issue response management process, you need to have all of those evidence that you actually tried to do the right thing to help do the root cause analysis of what actually went wrong when it shouldn't have. Next slide, please. So, transposing privacy by design into this privacy engineering and assurance process is a two-step process. We look at those classic 7 foundation principles as a vision of what we want to do, but they are subjective. My time's up. Or I guess I have a few seconds left, 48 seconds left. They are very much subjective and unmeasurable. We need to map those into a set of privacy policies that the company has. There needs to be a governance structure that is accountable all the way up to the board level. We need processes, book of knowledge, a set of principles that guide the company. Clearly there need to be roles and responsibilities, so-called ACRI or RACI. We have those in our company, so individuals know explicitly what their roles are, and also I mentioned the governance. And then at a unit level or a business level, you need the standard operating procedures that are actually the granular things that you do within the product teams. So in summary, what we want to do is transpose privacy by design into a manageable but also systematic way into the product development lifecycle. That's the goal of privacy engineering and assurance. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Frank. How many people are involved in this cycle?
So Nokia is not the size it used to be, but we are now 3 units. We have a networking unit. Hannes knows it very well. It used to be Nokia Siemens Network. Now it's Nokia Networks. That's the majority of the revenue of the company. We have a maps group, which if you're from Berlin, you've heard of HERE Maps over on Invalidenstrasse. 80% of cars around the world are driving with NavTech navigation heads inside of them. That's the HERE unit. And then I'm from the technologies unit. That's where we manage the IPR and new product incubation. Within each of those units, we are required through our governance policy to have a privacy officer. In some of them that are big, like HERE and NSN, or networks now, they actually have multiple privacy managers to complement the privacy officer. And then I report to a privacy owner, who is a senior manager, who actually is accountable within my unit for all of the sign-offs that we need to do. We also have, as at a central level, Mikko Nivo, who's our equivalent of a CPO. We call him a global privacy officer. So he has got 1 foot on the dock in policy and 1 foot on the boat, which is our product development team. And then we actually have someone who sits on the board who actually ultimately is going to feel the shock if the lightning comes down the line.
Okay, and what would be the minimum number of employees in this?
Well, actually IAP done some research that says per 100 people how many you need. And it's basically, I think in my unit, we have 3 people, and we're, I think, about 500 people. So it's 100 to 1.
So doing the engineering, 3 people, not about privacy officers, but really the engineering
part. Well, the
part.
privacy officer is someone who is competent in that engineering skill.
Engineering.
Yes.
So not only handling legal complaints or so, but...
About 3 people per 100. I think I remember Zuckerberg said he wanted to have 1 coder for every 100 customers. I think, I'm sure Facebook with their share prices have quite a few more engineers than that per 100 customers, but that's not bad when you think about it. And you should be able to actually quantify about how many privacy engineers do I need per...
Now it's first Ultan being able to answer this challenging introduction?
Well, it might be challenging in some respects, but in others it won't be. And I think what I'm taking on here really is the role of my old position of being a software developer in either a small SME, a startup, a company that is, or a company that's global, that has an immature development or engineering process, or a company that says it has a mature engineering process, but in fact doesn't eat its own dog food. So in that respect, I think there is an opportunity on the ground for members of a development team, and I'm not speaking for all development teams because it probably isn't possible for the mom and pop shop who are, you know, 2 people developing an app that's going to take over the world, but for the company that's set up, designed to write software, if that's what their product is based on, then these are the kinds of people I'm talking about. I think they have already the tools, skills and technologies to do everything they need to do privacy by design. What they need is a little bit of motivation. They need someone who's interested, someone who wants to get away from being a slave to agile development, which can turn people into, or can turn developers into contract coders who have no interest in what they're doing other than getting code out the door. So I think for those people who are in that business, and I think they may not also be the likes of Frank's company, Nokia, who have an engineering background and who understand some of the rigors of what needs to be done. There's an opportunity for these people to go ahead and just get on with it and do it. They have the tools and technologies like aspect-oriented programming, cross-cutting concerns, annotations, preferences. They know how to validate their work with unit tests because that's what they do every day anyway. They can automate their user acceptance tests at the very end. They can automate their builds and build in code coverage metrics for privacy annotations, for the way they've the quality of their coding, their testing. They have patterns that they can use, creational and observational, from the Gang of Four that they can adopt or adapt for privacy cases rather than just security cases. I have a whole list of things that, you know, I would have used as a developer in a development team that I would have promoted among the team as being best practice, as being things you should do for quality, for security. And you can use the same things for privacy. The problem extends from, you know, modeling and data classification at the very beginning of the life cycle, all the way through to deployment and maintenance, and even at the end of life of the product. But key to that is a privacy engineer, and the role is multifunctional. It's being both a developer and being an evangelist, being a facilitator, being the one who talks to legal, who explains it, who gets it right, who can persuade management and perhaps the executive that it's a good thing to do, and to demonstrate by doing that it is a good thing to do. Companies these days, they know they have to have quality software. They know that unit testing has to be part of what they do. But that wasn't always the case. You can do the same thing with privacy, and it has been done with security to a large extent, you could argue. And of course, the problem not only extends across the process, but across the technology base, databases, multiple languages, components written in different languages, services both within and with outside the company, APIs have to be called in different ways, third parties are involved. So the problem isn't easy, it isn't small, but it is something that can be broken down and can be approached and tackled. And there are gains both for those individual developers, the ones that think that, you know, privacy is going to be a roadblock to them doing something, so they won't do it. Some developers will take it and run with it and make a huge career out of it. Not everyone will, but there are people who are there who will do it. So with those things, you can build up the experience, you can build up the book of patterns, you can build up the tutorials, the use cases, the cookbooks that people need, all those great things that developers like, you know. This is how you configure Apache. This is how you write an interceptor to ensure that the password is encrypted the right way, and so on and so forth. Without those things, like I've said before, we have the doomsday scenario. There will be a problem. There will be a breach. There will be a loss of trust. There will be fraud. Those consequences will arise. And you'll also end up seeing me, your DPA, tapping on your door going, you had a problem, you haven't done it right, I'm going to enforce now, and that will mean perhaps not a fine, but it could mean shutting down your business or that process in your business until it's corrected. And you don't really want that to happen. So for me, if you're ready, willing and able.
We actually would like to see something like that happen, just not on my shift.
It does happen, and it has happened quite recently, and I think it's going to happen more because one of the things about being a DPA and having very little resource is that it's very hard to take on an investigation on a large company on a privacy issue that might be nebulous because it involves a huge amount of resource. It's far easier if there's a problem, I'm talking in practical terms, to then say, okay, you guys go and get it fixed, do it on your time, you pay us as DPAs, but for the company who's in that position, it could be the death of the company. And it very nearly was in one case in Ireland very recently. So that's ultimately the doomsday situation that you don't want to happen. And I think if you're in the business of writing software and you have an interest in privacy, it's your duty and really in your own interests to get on and do it. Don't wait for the standards. Don't wait for the patterns. You can talk to your colleagues, you can talk to your peers, you can talk to us. The DPAs are available to consult with. So the tools, the opportunities, and the people are there. Please get on with it.
Thank you, Ultan. So I have no problem with you knocking on my door. Can we get back this on screen the slides from Frank? Anybody? Massimo, thank you. And because so this is now a quite seemingly complicated process that was well seemingly introduced. Many words. And on the other hand, I think no real disagreement from Ultan's side. More perhaps. Is this really the structure that solves that, or is it another kind of motivation which is needed?
I'm being quite simplistic, I think, in what I've just argued. Really, what I think is, in broad terms, what Frank is talking about is top-down approach. What I'm talking about is a grassroots, bottom-up approach. There are opportunities in both areas. If we can meet in the middle, then we can have the time. But the practical ways to do that, talked about tutorials, cookbooks, and so on.
And then, of course, this is now the question: do we have them already or not? So, for example, this slide here, we see there are the 7 foundational principles. Everybody knows them by heart, of course, and you know that it's not clear how to implement them, right? It's not clear. There are many ideas, and I can have a totally different opinion on those.
I don't think that we reference those in our operational privacy engineering. That is a vision that led us to internalize into our privacy engineering and assurance discipline what it means for an engineer. So you have to go up one more slide.
Okay.
Back up. One more. Okay, so what an engineer wants to know is, okay, I've got a cost center, I'm putting my team together. What are the things that I should be doing? So you can look at this in terms of what phase am I in the project. So this is a diagram I stole from HP, which actually emulates an agile, or as we use, Scrum process, where you have the Scrums going on with the sprints.
Okay, Shani, did they do it right?
To some release. Yep.
So we have HP here.
Yeah. Well, what we added under this was the education on the front. So anyway, and when we tried to put underneath it both our processes, our guidelines, our activities that we use, and tying them to logically, of course, no project goes like this. We also, which is hard to see, but under the release, we have what we call go live. So at our executive level, they actually stand up and support us in saying that we cannot go live with the product without having a privacy, security, and business continuity sign-off and we have about 17 items in there that have to be assured, verified that they're actually done according to the guidelines and the requirements. An interesting thing, though, I'd like to talk about, and that is on the privacy requirements. We believe that requirements need to be back mappable to privacy principles. Mm-hmm. So I like the 11 privacy principles within ISO 29100 privacy framework, which is freely available now from ISO in a digital form. Those 11 principles, I think if you wear a little pink glasses and squint a little bit, you can map them also to either OECD or FIP or the emerging principles from the proposed data protection regulation. We have those principles that then have a set of requirements. Those are engineering requirements. So those are functional requirements that need to be implemented. And next to that, we have the privacy common criteria. So if you're implementing them, what exactly does that mean if you are giving proper notice and consent? Well, it says what has to be there. And you can actually write engineering test cases for semi-automated test environments to actually verify that that has been implemented.
And so all the pieces are available at least for your internal purposes?
They are, and then on that last slide, the third bucket is where we actually take conceptually generic requirements and we actually say how do those apply if I'm making maps or if I'm making an Internet of Things sensor, etc. And this is just a kind of a visualization as you're developing. If you're a developer, you're down the middle and you're going and implementing through the design, implementation, and test iterations. And then you see there's a go live at the bottom. You don't get a sign off. You don't release the product if the privacy officer hasn't been able to verify.
Yeah, if the predefined tests are okay, then it's okay.
Well,
but
and
of course,
also that there's evidence, because
sure,
when the product goes in operation, there will be problems, and you need to do root cause analysis. And if you don't have evidence,
the comparison with the bridge in the beginning, with the bridge, you saw immediately that there was a problem, and probably you would have been able to find out a few weeks before. So already when it was implemented, but not always the right tests have been taken, and therefore in many cases we see that the privacy ideas have been all right, but the implementation still is quite wrong, and you only find out much later, and also by perhaps what was pointed out in the beginning. In very many cases, the adversary is not the attacker, not as in security, but it can be the organization profiting from the data. So this is also a kind of difference. You may design a thing that privacy is integrated as much as you like it, but of course there are also other requirements that have to be balanced. Now I've seen many people, also the engineers, taking part. From my side, I addressed Shani, so it's fair that she gets the first shot. And Hannes was quite early, then Kai, who else? Massimo? And yeah, okay, so that's 5. Shani.
Yes, I just wanted to say, yeah, not only do we, you mentioned about HP have a similar process for the different business units. I would say, to bring out the way that we do things and think about things in HP, there's this element of sort of privacy by design for individual products, services, applications, and assessing those in terms of risk early on and repeated as to what the impact would be for privacy and what needs to happen, and a whole process around that. And part of that, could be aspects of privacy-aware technologies, where you have this very strong link with the principles and think about how you can reflect that in products and services that are not specifically to do with privacy, as well as the potential to integrate PETs, which obviously are designed for privacy protection. But in conjunction with that, we have also what you've been describing here, but it's more in terms of the governance within the organization itself, in terms of an accountability process by which you try to make sure that you're doing the right thing and you're being compliant with and there's a potential for special technologies to be used within that process, within an organization itself. So, for example, we have the HP Privacy Advisor that we help to to help us make sure that our organizational privacy policies, which are 300 pages thick, are reflected throughout the organization, and we try to get employees, to understand what those are and use technology to get that message out to them, because you can't really expect all the employees to have that specialized knowledge. So I just wanted to give a framework, because it's not going against what you've said there, but I think there are all these different elements that can be brought in where you have a combination of and potential for usage of technology.
Okay, thank you. So also here we see an example. I know many of the questions they have in their internal checking, and they seem quite right. Okay, Hannes.
When I listen to the presentations and discussions so far, I wonder, like it sounds like there shouldn't be any problem at all.
Good news, right?
Security
not only a
and
little bit of
privacy
hope,
shouldn't be an issue. Unfortunately, my experience is a little bit different.
So we have now a few companies identified, and there everything is fine, and the rest is...
The rest apparently is bad. But I think someone mentioned it earlier, I think it was Jan, who said some of the really important decisions are made early in the process. And if you start off with the wrong architecture, then you will be... The other stuff is then just, you can still do the mapping and back to privacy principles, but it will be just a shell, an empty shell. And I think, Frank, you will see more of these empty shells in the future, I fear. But, so I think I'm trying to say, like, there must be something wrong with those processes, because otherwise we wouldn't have the problem, or nobody's using those processes.
Or they're too new, I don't know.
Or too new, or like the ones that Ultan mentioned, and they exist already for a while, so normally that should be, everything should be okay.
Yeah, my experience is that it's down to maturity. And even where you do have a mature organization, like perhaps Nokia or HP, where there's a good process in place, the company is so big, and the development technology, the software development is partitioned or siloed, that while there might be a central governance aspect to it, a policy, it's not always followed up or enforced or mature in every part of that organization. So you do get gaps, even in the mature companies. And on the other hand, even where you have a very mature company who, and this happens with plain old unit testing and test-driven development and agile and all this, where you follow that process and you do it very well, and you have champions for it and training and governance, you still have the situation where the big chief comes down on a Monday morning and goes, yeah, I don't like that, change it all. And your months, hours, days of work have gone, and all the effort you put into it is gone. And that makes a whole, it's a problem that we can't enforce against, but ultimately it's the maturity, the acceptance, and the culture of privacy by design that needs to be engendered here. We have to have the governance, we have to have the architecture.
Do you think security by design is better off? So we are here for privacy by design.
Well, security is more mature, and it's an easier problem to tackle, I think. It's tractable.
Frank wants to say something? Be short. We have 4 more questions here.
Yeah, well, I heard 2 questions that I ought to be able to, in parallel, reply to, rather than having my time cut out at the end.
Do so.
So, Hannes and I have had many saunas together when he was at Nokia Siemens Network, debating ad hoc, as he's using an IETF versus systematic approach. He also came from an organization that was quite mixed up on its privacy work compared to other parts of Nokia, but they're maturing quite well. And I have high expectations. Actually, if you have a piece that Ultan talked about, and I also heard from our colleague from HP, HP is one of a set of about 6 companies that have been pioneering accountability. Nokia under Mikko Niva is part of that group of lone wolves who have been pushing for it, and it's not just talking, it's also walking the walk. And underneath Scott at HP, Scott Taylor and Miko Niba and others that are part of the Simple Accountability Project, they've actually fostered within their organization accountability to the level where the big cheese cannot come in on Monday and say, stop, do this, rip that out.
So perhaps this is really not the problem, but there are many problems.
There are organizations, certainly in a single-person shop, and I think Ultan has a good point there. It's not scaling up, it's scaling down. But there are organizations like GSMA that have a track record with their mobile privacy initiative of reaching out to the mobile app developers. We have ADA that has also been working to put together both training material, forums and workshops, and the ones that I've attended from ADA, most of the people are single-person shops or just a couple people. Someone is sent and the other 2 people are back at the shop working on the software. So I think we are starting to see that. We are in a formative stage, but I'm very encouraged. I believe that this methodology does work. It is not a static methodology. This is something that needs to be an embracement of quality principles of iterative, incremental improvement. We do not have a complete book of knowledge for privacy like you do for project management, say Project Management Institute, but we will get there. I don't know how many people from a security background know Schumacher and Schumacher's 500-page book on security design patterns. 100 pages tell you what a design pattern is and how to use it. 400 pages you can leaf through and actually see design patterns for particular security problems. Well, there actually is a 400-page book like that from the Japanese Smartphone Security Association for Android app developers, published, I think, in somewhere between April and June of this year. And it actually tells you here are the security issues you need to deal with in Android. Then it has a bunch of rules for each of those particular points. Then the last 200 pages or so are code snippets that you can actually use for
So we would need something for privacy.
Well,
openly available,
something like that
maintained
for privacy
regularly.
needs to be done, yeah. There is a privacy design group at Stanford University. I believe it's Stanford, but someone's going to tell me it's Berkeley. Anyway, that group is trying to capture design patterns for privacy. And so, I mean, in 20 years, we're going to be sitting here patting ourselves on the back, I think, for the progress that we've made.
Okay, now I have many questions and also a person on design patterns. Kai was the next in the row.
I wanted to clarify, my understanding of the bridge case was that the bridge was actually not breaking down while it was under construction, but was breaking down sometime later. Maybe I'm wrong on this specific bridge case.
No, that's correct. That's the point, is that it was built based on designs that did not have a structural engineer approve it. That would be analogous to putting together a protocol where it hadn't gone through a proper privacy and security considerations. You put it into place, it's part of the European single digital marketplace, and then you find out the market has to be shut down for a number of months to fix the problems.
So the good or the bad news from that is that actually these things happen also with other buildings. And there is on the other side, there is a, maybe not tradition, but at least a way to handle with these kind of things. You have buildings, you enter them because they're too complex to check them completely before you actually inhabit and before you inhabit them. And then you need to deal with the repairs later. And there are obviously regulatory, contractual, and all other kinds of processes, including liability, to deal with these kind of cases. And the question is whether we can learn something from that in terms of trying to actually be able to pursue certain privacy issues and go after those who have been a bit too lax on certain things. It is certainly a major heavy regulatory effort, but I could imagine that maybe even it's happened in the past, and I can imagine it would raise motivation to do these kind of things.
Indeed, I waited for the word liability. So there are not so many lawyers here, but where to put here the liability? Perhaps also to think about it right now, let's collect the questions and then have the last few minutes discussion. Otherwise, we are not allowed to get a coffee before the next one. We can discuss for 10 minutes without coffee or for 5 minutes with coffee. That was what Achim told me. No coffee for Frank. Okay. Okay, so Massimo was the next one. Be short.
Yeah, short question on the software engineering, let's say, methodology to Frank and whomever else wants to respond to my question. Meaning, I mean, we have seen that there is a software engineering life cycle that takes into account privacy requirements. It has been built. We see also what is happening also in the ISO standardization 27001, which has been expanded to take into account the privacy requirements. The question is, have you identified, because of the privacy requirements with respect to the security requirements, a new steps in the process, meaning that you could have requirements, you plug another types of requirements among the other requirements in the relevant steps of the software life cycle. The question is the specificity of the privacy requirements determined something new that you have found in the process as such, new procedures, new processes, new blocks,
very good question.
New empty shells in the overall procedure? That's a question.
Very good question. We first collect now the remaining questions. I think from your side, yeah.
Actually, I just wanted to ask Frank if you have any experience or kind of measurement in how far privacy has become better within Nokia applying this process, or I don't know how long ago it's that you started applying this, or and how far you measure that.
The answer very quickly, or
If there's a quick answer, one sentence.
Yeah, I think the best metric is when issues do happen, like the FTC calls you. How many lawyers does it take, and how many senior engineers does it take to respond for your interview that will happen Wednesday morning, and it's Friday at 5 o'clock? So we have had one of those, and it was just a courtesy interview, but it could lead to more. And yes, that's where the evidence side in the previous slide here, or two slides before that, the evidence is very important because generally, if you have a death march, a lot of software is death marches to a release date. The engineers who wrote the software are not there, so if the evidence isn't captured as you're going along, it's very hard to recreate.
You may get such calls if you have not sufficient privacy, or if you have too much
You're going to get those calls anyway.
Anyway, okay.
Because things happen. And we need the regulators to have a regular drumbeat of enforcement, right?
Meaning more resources for the regulators.
Of course.
Jan,
of course.
you had the last question right now? Nobody else? Okay, Jan. Can you use the microphone? Jan, use the microphone, otherwise our online people.
Just taken aback, since we're holding off people from the coffee break. I'm one of the lawyers in the room, but I'm not going to talk about liability today.
Of course you can answer on liability, Jan. Okay, and Jaap Henk on design patterns, anything? Do you want to develop 200 pages?
Not by myself, but I would be happy to collaborate with our people to do something in that space, because I think it's important.
Okay, so Jaap Henk is really doing design patterns. And another question, and then we have the last comments after the question from Frank and from Ultan, and then coffee. Okay. Yeah.
I'm Lena. I'm actually working as a legal researcher at Leuven University. And I'm puzzled by the debate, not because I'm a lawyer and you discuss a lot of technical aspects, but because you tend to confuse two concepts. So are we talking about privacy by design, or do we talk about data protection by design? Because at the moment the proposed regulation discusses the concept of data protection by design and not privacy by design. So where is the limit between two? Do you see that? And on what we should actually focus? This is one thing. And the other thing is that we in law, in particular in the field of data protection, and in IT we have one principle which unifies us two, as weird as it sounds, but it's true. That is accountability. And why are not we building that privacy for some others who tend to be more specific with concepts, data protection by design, based within the scope of accountability principle?
So indeed, we mix the concepts. The question is whether we really have to separate them, and everybody was aware of that. So I think now we have collected all the questions. Frank.
Yeah, so I'll go back to the first one of data protection versus privacy. And I think in most jurisdictions, the word data protection is used I know in Finland the translation is data protection. Privacy seems to be something that North Americans in the United States want to embrace. I just immediately do the transposition of the two. It doesn't bother me. The issue that I do have with simply using data protection is I heard the word 27,001 used just recently, and certainly taking information security management system, which is concerned about making sure that you are set up to protect the corporation's computers and the data within them from unauthorized access, is not what privacy or data protection is really about. It's about reducing to a negligible residual risk the harm to the individual citizen for unauthorized disclosure or misuse of their personal data. And so if you can make that transition and you're comfortable with data protection, that's okay. But if my British colleagues turn around and then start saying you need a security framework to do data protection because protecting data is a matter of security, that starts to make my knees shake a little bit. That's when I will say no, not data protection, privacy, and that unnerves them a little bit, unfortunately. Whether we need a privacy management system, that is an ongoing debate, which I will leave to Jan and Kai to explain to you maybe this evening over some cool beverages. It will continue to be, I think, a long debate. Now, on accountability, there's an important thing that maybe you take back to Leuven, a beautiful town, and that is the accountability project stood up and worked on accountable organization because most organizations think compliance to the law is adequate. And the people who adhere to accountability say that they want more than being compliant. They want to be able to demonstrate accountability. And so when you use the word accountable, be very clear on the semantics, just like we all use the word trust. Well, which philosopher's view of trust do you follow? I happen to work for a company headquartered in Helsinki, and I prefer Immanuel Kant view on trust, rather than a contractual trust from the Industrial Revolution, which is basically based on some contract, because I know what the privacy policy is going to look like there. It's going to look like a legal contract. So these words are very important, and these are what I really do focus on with engineers, and they actually grok it. They not only understand it, they feel it. So they understand the difference, because a guy who spends late hours trying to get the last set of bugs out of his code when his manager says, wait, it's good enough. He is trying to be accountable rather than just compliant.
Okay, so meaning we have to be sure what we are talking about if we really want to implement something, and there can be many things that are reasonable to implement, of course. Ultan and then Peter Hustings.
I'm not going to answer all the questions, but just the comments have been made. A few points. Governance, absolutely essential, along with transparency. If you don't have governance and you don't have good governance, then nothing else will follow. If governance is broken and the big cheese comes down on Monday, then that's the end game. Massimo, we talked about whether or not adding privacy requirements into the life cycle was anything different than what we have already. I don't believe it is. From an engineer's point of view, it can be treated as just another aspect of quality and privacy. So we can add these in if we know what they are, and then we can validate them. One of the big things we see in companies, and what we've talked about generally here, is the maturity level. What I would like to see would be companies demonstrating their maturity, or at least investigating their own maturity, because companies don't realize or have a false sense of their own maturity when it comes to their engineering capability. So it would be good to get an independent validation of that, and if companies can do that, they'll make my job easier, because technology involves software a lot of the time. Being able to demonstrate your maturity in that area is a good thing. It goes to demonstrate the intent, like we've talked about, the accountability aspect. And for me, as a DPA in Europe, we talk about data regulation or data protection regulation and privacy as a kind of more general societal kind of thing, a softer aspect, not something we can really regulate against. Our data protection regulation is fairly clear in what it is, but we do use the terms interchangeably. And that's pretty much it. The patterns, I think, and the knowledge base we have to build up. And with those things, then we can move forward with privacy by design.
Marit, just about the measuring maturity, I like privacy capability measuring, and Kai and Jan have a standard called the Privacy Capability Assessment, ISO 29190, which will do just that. We tried using that actually last year as a pilot for the standard, and we found it quite useful.
As a quick response, I'm a little bit skeptical about engineering capability maturity, and that's due to the fact that the regulation only calls for level 2, which is we go from ad hoc to a documented level, and that's not even making it measurable or being able at level 4 to learn from a previous experience. So at least from the legal point of view, not a lot is going to be enforceable in the near future.
Thanks you for the clarifications, and we will take it afterwards, but first let's finish this session and put your names on the list there, then because the discussion will continue. Peter Hustings for the last thing here.
Yeah, well, just a brief comment on the legal concepts. Now, the point has been made, privacy, data protection. In my view, it is very important on the level of legal concepts, that is, to distinguish between those two. One important reason is that they have been expressed both next to each other in the European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights, where, simply put, privacy emphasizes more the negative side not to interfere, the invasive, and data protection emphasizes more the elements of the safeguards, the responsibilities, the rights, and the institutional oversight. And so the entire review is based on the idea of delivering the safeguards in a more effective manner. And in our daily practice, we apply both, and sometimes in different proportions depending on the subject. But in the context of this discussion, we have not distinguished, there is a global discussion which moves from data privacy to data protection and privacy and back. And the language of the regulation emphasizing data protection by design is consistent to itself, but I would not be shocked if you would speak of privacy by design, because then you will be understood just as well.